teaching, then you'll have the links. Okay, it's the same link each week, right? Okay, so this is the headline of the course. Okay, I'll be talking about intonation. I entitled this course Intonation because, in fact, during the semester we talk about rhythm and intonation. So in your TEDs, you study sentence stress, and I'm not going to talk about sentence stress here because I only have 6 weeks. So here I will only deal with intonation. Okay. So what I'll do first, I'll explain the differences between prosody and intonation. I explain what I mean when I talk about prosody and when I talk about intonation. And then, so as you understand, I'll be talking about intonation. And then I'll divide the course into 2 main parts, in fact. The first one will be devoted to intonation, really intonation and intonation patterns. So it's the 4 first points here. I'll talk about tone units, tonics, and tones, and explain what intonation patterns are for English. Okay, and then the second part of the course will deal with the attitudinal functions of intonation. As far as assessment is concerned, the assessment for this particular course, for the cours théorique, for the theoretical course, for the CM, is a written exam which lasts 30 minutes, or, well, in fact, you really do what you want because it's part of the linguistic exam. So you have, in fact, you have 2 hours for linguistics CM and grammar TD and phonology CM. Okay, so I usually say 30 minutes because you don't need more time. And so what you'll have to do is the intonative analysis of the text. You'll have to divide the text into tone units and tell what intonation patterns you would apply on each tone unit. So chunking is the division, if you like, into tone units. And then you'll have a few questions, maybe just 2, on the attitudinal functions of intonation. So exactly what we do during this course, okay? And of course, we already, we apply this in the TD. So if you have questions about this particular course, then you can ask. So a few references, which I will give you on the Amethyst page, or I already gave you, I think maybe, I can't remember, I'll check, on the Amethyst page. And I'll use this one for the course. I used English Intonation by Wells. And so I really follow what he says. And I also follow Ginesi, mes méthodes de phonétique anglaise. So it's kind of a mix between the 2. And if you need more details, then you can have a look at all those books. Okay. So first here, I would like to give you the definition of prosody, in fact. So prosody is the field of phonetics which studies, as you can read, intonation, accentuation, rhythm, and the duration of phonemes. Divide prosody into 3 main parts. Different degrees of prominence. You study the degrees of prominence, and those different degrees contribute to the formation of groupings. The is part of accentuation, part of prosody. And it's an important part because, as you know, the rhythm, well, rhythm in English is very different from rhythm in French. Then there's the temporal dimension, which is dealt with when you do prosody in general. So this concerns duration, pauses, tempo. Tempo is speech rate. And the third part is intonation. So in fact, intonation is part of prosody. Prosody is larger than intonation. Okay. Will this be on Amétis? Yes, probably, but not now. Maybe at the end of the 6 weeks. Okay, or maybe at the end of the first part. I'm not giving you the whole slideshow now. Okay. So intonation then, as I said, it's one of the 3 parts of prosody. Well, in fact, in prosody, you can add a 4th one, which I'm not doing this here. It's voice quality, which anyway. So intonation is really the system formed by the distinctive melodic patterns of a language. Okay, when I talk about distinctive, I mean those that make sense. Okay, for instance, and I'll show you that in a minute, depending on what melody you use, then you don't say the same thing. For instance, you can make the difference between a question and an assertion, just simply with intonation. So this is what I call distinctive. And if I take Ladd's definition, he says that intonation refers to the use of suprasegmental phonetic features to convey post-lexical or sentence-level pragmatic meanings in a linguistically structured way. Okay? So this means that intonation gives information at a suprasegmental level, that is at the level above the word, above the phoneme, at the level of the sentence, like, as I said, the type of sentence, so you can make the difference between a question or an assertion, but also it also gives information on the focus, for instance, depending on where you're going to place your emphasis or your main melodic movement, as I'll explain in a minute as well. And also the information structure, I'll show you, the information structure is really given through intonation, through the different patterns that you're going to realize. Okay. So, intonation follow the British school, because there are 2 different schools. There's the American school and the British school. So I'll follow our tone units, tonic. Later, but here I just want to show you the importance of tone units. So a tone unit is a global intonation contour, and usually you divide a long sentence into several tone units. You do the same in French, in all languages. It's kind of physiological because just simply you can't say a very long sentence in one tone unit, because at one moment you have to take breath. And tone units were called breath groups at one moment in the history, if I can say, of intonation. But then, in fact, authors realize that you don't take your breath each time you do a chunking, and sometimes you can also take your breath in between a tone unit. so they changed the name. There are different names. There are intonation groups, intonation units, breath groups, and so on. I use tone unit. It's just simply it's simpler, in fact, because we have tone units, tonics, and tones, so the 3 T's. So tone units are divisions. If you have a long sentence, it's divided. And even if you have a short sentence, sometimes you have divisions into tone units to show to show what you mean, just simply. So it's examples. You're going to understand the examples here. For instance, all those sentences here on the slide can be pronounced differently. You can have 1 or 2 tone units, sometimes 3. And so take the first one and try and see the 2 different ways in which you can pronounce and the 2 different meanings, the 2 different pronunciations will have. So I'll leave you just a few minutes. And same for the 4 sentences, in fact. So I take the first one. If you just say 1 tone unit, so you have no separation or division, then you say, he wrote the letter sadly. Then you can hear that, well, maybe not, but anyway, I do a falling global pattern. So at the end, I fall. I say, he wrote the letter sadly. And there's a fall on sad. He wrote the letter sadly. And this means he wrote the letter in a sad way. He was sad when he wrote the letter, so he wrote the letter in a sad way. I made no division at all. But I can also pronounce this sentence with a division between letter and sadly here. If I make this division, then I say, he wrote the letter, sadly. And here you have 2 tone units. And so you have 2 different melodic movements. So I made 2 falls, one on letter and one on sad, sadly. So I repeat, I said, he wrote the letter, sadly, which means that it is sad that he wrote the letter, but he wasn't necessarily sad when he wrote the letter. It's my opinion that it's sad that he wrote the letter. Okay, so if you do that, then you turn sadly into a sentence adverb, an adverbe de phrase in French, and sentence adverbs are always pronounced in a separate tone unit. And you could also have sadly at the beginning of the sentence. It's same when you say, unfortunately, he couldn't come last night. Unfortunately is a separate tone unit. In that case, a sentence adverb bears on the whole sentence. And if you don't divide the sentence into 2 tone units, then the adverb bears on the verb only and not on the whole sentence. Okay. So you see, according to how you divide a sentence into tone units, you have 2 different meanings. Okay. Same here in this sentence. So the first option is 1 division here. So here you say, they took the passengers who were injured to the hospital. Okay, 1 division, and so the main melodic movement is on injured. They took the passengers who were injured to the hospital. Okay, this means that they didn't take all the passengers to the hospital. They only took those who were injured, and those who were not injured were not taken to the hospital. Now, you can pronounce the sentence like this. They took the passengers who were injured to the hospital. And here you have 2 divisions. So in fact, you have 3 tone units. 1, 2, 3. And if you say they took the passengers who were injured to the hospital, it means that all the passengers were injured and they were all taken to the hospital. Okay, this is exactly the same in French. It's the difference between the two relative. Here you have a determinative relative or an appositive relative. So here, when you do this division, it's an appositive relative. You just make a position here. And if you do this, it's a determinative relative. Okay. Now, the third one, it's the same principle. You can either say, she hit the man with a stick. Okay, someone is asking me to repeat the two interpretations for the second sentence, I suppose. Okay, if I say this, they took the passengers who were injured to the hospital. Who were injured is an apposition, an apposition. It means that all the passengers were injured. I just indicate that the passengers were injured. But in fact, I could remove this and just simply say they took the passengers to the hospital. But here I decide to add that the passengers were injured, were all injured. So I say they took the passengers who were injured to the hospital. Now, if I don't divide the sentence here, but only here, and say they took the passengers who were injured to the hospital, it means that I only took those who were injured. Well, they only took those who were injured to the hospital. Okay, so in French, it's exactly the same as I said. In French, you have ils ont emmené les passagers qui étaient blessés à l'hôpital, ou bien ils ont emmené les passagers qui étaient blessés à l'hôpital. La différence entre relative, déterminative, celle-ci que vous avez au tableau, elle détermine quels passagers ont été emmenés. C'est seulement ceux qui étaient blessés. Et la relative appositive, celle-ci, où là, j'ajoute simplement une information sur les passagers, mais qui n'est pas déterminante. En fait, je pourrais... She hit a man with a stick. It means that she hit a person who had a stick. Okay. Of course, in fact, the division into turn units can disambiguate the sentence, but sometimes you just say she hit the man with a stick, and you don't know which interpretation it is if you just make one tone unit, and sometimes it's the context which is going to help you disambiguate. But if it's really ambiguous, then you use the intonation and you use the division into tone units. So either she hit the man with a stick or she hit the man with a stick. And the last one is exactly the same thing. If you say he saw the man from the upstairs flat, it means that he was on the upstairs flat when he saw the man. Okay, so the person who saw the man was on the upstairs flat. But if you say he saw the man from the upstairs flat, it means that he saw the man who lives on the upstairs flat, for instance. Okay, and again, if you just simply say he saw the man from the upstairs flat, it's ambiguous. And it's often, in fact, speech is often ambiguous. But since you have the context, it's usually quite clear. Okay, is that okay for everyone? Any questions? You can, of course, ask a question. Okay. Now, maybe, so this was tone. one interpretation of for every tone units according to the context. So you normally don't have several possibilities, you just have one. Okay. Yes, so of course I'll give you sentences in which you have to divide in such and such a way. Okay. So tonic nucleus. So the tonic is the the tonic is the main accent in the sentence. And in fact, you already started studying sentence stress. It's very easy in a neutral. In fact, if you take all the sentence stresses, the nucleus is the last stress, the last accent, the last sentence stress. So the last accent in your sentence. Well, no, in your tone unit, and you have only one nucleus in a tone unit. You can't have two. You just have one. It's very easy. You divide your text into tone, or your sentence into tone units. And if you find all your sentence stresses, the last one is the nucleus. Okay? And in a neutral context, in a neutral context, you place a sentence stress on all the lexical items. Okay, you remember that? The difference between what we call a lexical word, it's a word which is semantically important, as opposed to grammatical or tool words. Right? So if we look at this example here, so last night I went to the cinema. Okay, it's a neutral context here. So my sentence stresses are last, night. Okay, the last one is night, so the nucleus is night. And in the second part, I went to the cinema. I have two sentence stresses, went and cinema. And the last one is cinema. So my nucleus is cinema. Okay, I underlined the nuclei here in the two tone units. I didn't underline all the sentence stresses. Okay, if I wanted to underline all the sentence stresses, I would have this. These are all the sentence stresses, and my nucleus is maybe here, if I write it in capital letters, I'd have this. Okay, so the nucleus, the nucleus is the last sentence stress. Okay, and in a neutral context, of course, it's the stressed syllable of the last lexical item. Because in a neutral context, since you're going to stress all the lexical items, then the last one is the nucleus. But in a non-neutral context, it can be any syllable. For instance, if I say, last night, I went to the cinema. Of course, you need to imagine a context. Someone talked about someone going to the cinema, made a mistake, said, for instance, I know that last night John went to the cinema, and my answer is, last night I went to the cinema. In French, you would translate probably, c'est moi qui suis allé au cinéma, as opposed to, c'est pas John, c'est moi. Okay, donc hier soir, c'est moi qui suis allé au cinéma. Is it the same if the sentence were I went to the cinema last night? Oui. Exactly the same. And the difference would be if you have this sentence, you would probably have this, you would have a new, well, again, it depends on the context. But if you say this, you'd probably have, I went to the cinema last night, because probably you're already talking about what everybody did last night. So last night is already known. This would be given information. Okay, so you wouldn't place an accent, you wouldn't accentuate last night again because it's already known. So what you would like to to emphasize, or at least what you would like to make important, is the fact that you went to the cinema. So your sentence stresses would be went and cinema. Okay, not last or night, because already known. So you'd have, I went to the cinema last night. But you could also say exactly the same sentence, saying, I went to the cinema last night. So in that case, you'd have simply, I went to the cinema last night. And your nucleus would be I, and it would be the only sentence stress. And if you say, I went to the cinema last night, it means it's not John who went, it's me. So I went to the cinema last night. Okay. So this is what is it clear? Yes. Kauter, is it clear? Okay. Welcome. So, sorry. Yeah. So what's important is that you should remember that there's only one nucleus in the tone unit, and that the nucleus is going to bear the tone that I'll mention in a few minutes. Now, just a few examples to show you the importance of tone units. Okay. So again, same as for the division into tone units, you have different meanings according to where you're going to place the nucleus. Well, the difference between tone unit and nucleus, the tone unit is the chunking, the division into groups, into units. Okay, I take this. I come back to this, okay, just to illustrate the difference between tone units and nuclei. If I take this sentence here, I divide the sentence into 3 tone units. I say they took the passengers who were injured to the hospital. Okay, you have 3 tone units. In each tone unit, you have 1 nucleus. Where would be your nucleus here in the first one? Well, you look at the sentence stresses and you say, I have a sentence stress here on took and another one here on passengers. Okay, so the nucleus is the last one. The nucleus is passengers. Okay, in the second one, who were injured, I only have 1 sentence stress. So of course, my sentence stress, oops, made a mistake here. Okay. My sentence stress here is injured. Sorry, my nucleus here is injured. And to the hospital, again, there's only 1 sentence stress. So of course, it's going to be the nucleus. Okay, 1 nucleus per tone unit. Is that clearer? The difference between tone units and nucleus? Okay, same here, for instance, if you say the sentence with 1 tone unit, you say, she hit the man with a stick. The nucleus is stick. If you say, she hit the man with a stick, 1 nucleus on man and 1 nucleus on stick. Okay. So if I come back to my tonics or nuclei. So a few sentences to show you the importance of the place of nucleus for meaning, because depending on where you place your nucleus, you don't say the same thing. The first one is a bit difficult. I know that, so it's the same principle as above. For each sentence, you have several different meanings possible according to where you place your nucleus, no matter the division into tone units. So here, only 1 tone unit. Okay. Can you see the different meanings you could have? I'll just give you a few seconds to think a little bit about it. This one is probably the most difficult one. So the simple one, the most common one, I should say. Yes, you could have, well, first I'll start, okay, this one is possible, but I'll start with the most common one, the most neutral one, exactly. I thought he was married, exactly. That's the most neutral one. In fact, you place your nucleus on the last lexical item. No, this one doesn't, the last one here, I thought he was / married, doesn't work. Consider you only have one tone unit, okay? So just only one tone unit. So the first solution is to place your nucleus here on married and say, I thought he was married. And that means he's not married, okay? I thought he was, but he isn't. The other sentence stresses are thought, and that's it. And married, of course. That's the last one. So you say, I thought he was married. That's the most neutral one. Then you could say, as I have a suggestion here, you could say, I thought he was married. This is possible as well. I thought he was married. Here, as soon as you place a stress on a pronoun, which is normally not accented at the level of the sentence, you know that pronouns are normally not accented. As soon as you place an accent on a pronoun, then the pronoun becomes contrastive. So if you say, I thought he was married, it means he as opposed to someone else. In French, you translate by something like, je pensais que lui, il était marié. Ok. Sous-entendu, c'est pas lui qui est marié, c'est un autre. And a third solution, again, the one I have, the suggestion I have here doesn't work. Imagine there's only one tone unit. It's always the same. And the last one is the most difficult one. Okay, just one tone unit. It's when you place the nucleus on thought and say, I thought he was married. Can you understand what that means? I thought he was married. It means I knew he was married. Okay, I knew it. So in fact, if you say I thought he was married, it means he is married indeed, and I knew it. Okay, so you see, if you place a nucleus on thought, you knew he was married, he is married. And if you place the nucleus on married, it means he's not married. So it's exactly the opposite. And just simply with the change of place of nucleus, you just simply change the whole meaning of the sentence. Right? Now the second one is a little bit maybe it's funny, say. Here there's a you play on dog and biscuits. So again, the most neutral one. Non. The question is, à l'examen, on devra toujours choisir la forme neutre. Non, ça dépendra du contexte. C'est fait exprès, justement. Il y aura des fois où vous serez obligé de choisir une forme non neutre. Mais si le contexte est neutre, oui, vous choisissez la forme neutre. Mais je ferai exprès de vous donner des phrases où, par exemple, vous devrez choisir une forme non neutre en fonction du contexte. Par exemple, parce qu'un élément aura déjà été donné avant, donc vous ne le réaccentuez pas. Comme tout à l'heure pour last night, mettons. Ou pour went to the cinema. Si went to the cinema a déjà été mentionné, vous comprendrez qu'il faut dire, par exemple, I went to the cinema. Et puis voilà. Enfin, donc, vous saurez s'il faut choisir la forme neutre ou pas. Donc là, the most neutral one is, again, the last lexical item. So, nucleus on biscuits. Okay. You say, she gave her biscuits. It means she gave biscuits to her dog. Okay. The other sentence stresses are gave and dog. And the last one is the nucleus. And you can hear that there's a fall on B, this and I say, she gave her dog biscuits. Okay, if I could draw it, I draw something. I'd say, well, yes, you have the fall on B. She gave her dog biscuits. And then you can also say, can you guess the other solution, which is a funny one, by the way? It's this one. If you place the nucleus on dog and not on biscuits, then you make a compound with dog biscuits. Okay, and you say, if you say she gave her dog biscuits, well, in fact, it can be ambiguous. It could mean she didn't give biscuits to her cat, she gave biscuits to her dog. Okay, but it could also mean that you make a compound with dog biscuits and say she gave dog biscuits to someone who's a woman because it's her. Ok? Donc, en français, ça donne elle a donné des biscuits à son chien, ou elle a donné, ou bien la deuxième, celle-ci de solution, c'est elle lui a donné des biscuits pour chien. Et lui, c'est une fille. Elle lui a donné des biscuits pour chien. Okay? Because a compound, as you probably saw last year, a compound is normally stressed on the first element. So if you say dog biscuits, you make a compound. Biscuit pour chien. Okay. The third sentence, well, here you can imagine you have, yes, there's no punctuation, of course, because otherwise it's not ambiguous. So here you could say, is that the man George asked? Oh, sorry. There's only one tone unit. I'm not playing with tone units here. So here you say, is that the man George asked? And your sentence stresses are, is that a man? The last one, man, is the nucleus. And you can imagine here you'd have this punctuation, okay? You'd have, and probably this. Is that the man George asked? Okay, and no accents here. It's de-accented on the pronounced on a low tone. So my melodic movement here is on man. Is that the man George asked? Okay, or you could have this. Is that the man George asked? In fact, you have accents everywhere on all the words. And the last one is the nucleus. Is that the man George asked? Which means, est-ce que c'est l'homme qu'a demandé Georges, en fait? Enfin, après qui Georges a demandé. Okay. The fourth one is a bit difficult as well, in fact. And here you have a division into tone units here. You have two tone units, so you have two nuclei. The first one is not, it's always, the first one doesn't change, it's the second one that changes. So the first one is, I'd had no news from George. So the nucleus is George. And the second one can be different. And according to where you place the nucleus, then you don't have the same meaning. So what would you have? The most common one, or neutral one, would be nucleus on brother. Okay? And you'd say, I'd had no news from George, so I wrote to my brother, which means that the brother, no. Which one? This one? No, probably not. non plus. So, non plus. Is it okay for the first one? The first one, your brother is probably a friend of George's or just simply his neighbor, maybe. So, exactly. It's wrote. The second solution is wrote. So the first one, I had no news from George, so I wrote to my brother, which means that your brother probably knows George and he maybe could give you news from George. Now, if you don't place an accent on brother and place an accent on wrote and say, I had no news from George, so I wrote to my brother. It means that you consider brother as already known, as given information. And if brother is a given information, what's it mean? It means that your brother is George. Or maybe I should say it means that George is your brother. So what's important here is that you wrote, because probably you phoned him several times and he never answered. So you decided to write to him. If you say, I had no news from George, so I wrote to my brother. It really means that George is your brother. And this is why you don't place another accent on brother, because it's already known. So it's the information has already been given. Okay. So you see this idea of given information, and yes, really here it's not the fact that you want to emphasize right. It's really the fact that brother is already known. And finally, she wanted to see George. Je n'ai pas bien compris. OK. La deuxième interprétation, c'est qu'en fait, si vous ne réaccentuez pas brother, et que donc, en gros, vous accentuez votre dernier accent de phrase qui est wrote, parce qu'en fait, il n'y en a plus qu'un, ça veut dire que brother est déjà connu. Et si brother est déjà connu, c'est que George et brother, c'est la même personne. C'est que George, c'est le frère. Du coup, vous n'avez pas besoin de réaccentuer le frère. Parce que imaginez que je remets George à chaque fois. Ok, vous avez compris. Okay. Parce que, vous voyez, si j'avais George, je ne pourrais pas dire I had no news from George, so I wrote to George. Vous voyez, ça ne marche pas. Là, c'est exactement pareil, en fait. I had no news from George, so I wrote to my brother. Si George et le frère sont le même, on ne peut pas réaccentuer frère. Voilà, c'est juste ça. Okay, well, the last one is really an easy one because it's just simply what you want to. No, again, it's information. In fact, you say, yes, you say she wanted to see George this morning, or she wanted to see George this morning. Excusez-moi, parce que j'ai une question. What is the nucleus here, wrote or George? There are two nuclei because there are two tone units. You see, I divided the sentence into two tone units. So on the first one it's George, and on the second one is wrote. So here, either morning. In that case, you want to insist on the fact that it's this morning that you want to see George. And probably the fact that you wanted to see George is already known. And you just simply say when. So you say, she wanted to see George this morning. In French, you may probably translate by c'est ce matin qu'elle voulait voir Georges. So morning is the most important information you give. Or you say, she wanted to see George this morning. And in that case, morning is probably already known as well. And in French, you'd say, c'est Georges qu'elle voulait voir ce matin. She wanted to see George this morning. C'est Georges qu'elle voulait voir ce matin. So this morning is already known. Now, if neither George nor morning are known, then it's the most neutral one. And of course, you're going to say morning. She wanted to see George this morning. And then again, this one would be ambiguous and it would depend on the context. So in the context, if wanted to see George is already known, in French, you translate c'est ce matin qu'elle voulait voir Georges. If it's not already known, if everything is new, then in French you'd say elle voulait voir Georges ce matin. So the two elements, George and morning, and this morning, are new. Okay. But since you can only have one nucleus, it's the last one. I think I'm forgetting something I wanted to tell you. On aurait pu dire she wanted to see George this morning. This would sound a little bit strange if you say she wanted to see George this morning. This would seem like an addition. Et mettre le nucléus sur George et morning. Ouais, non, ça fait bizarre. But she wanted to see George this morning. And yes, it would really sound like an addition. And you forgot to say this morning and you add it. But really the context will help you with that. What about she wanted to see George this morning? Yes, this works. It always works, in fact, because as I said, as soon as you emphasize a pronoun, as soon as you place an accent on a pronoun, then it becomes contrastive. So yes, indeed, you could say, she wanted to see George this morning, which would mean, c'est elle qui voulait voir Georges ce matin. And that would mean, oh yes, I know what I want to say. And that would mean that someone wanted to see George this morning is already known. And what you say is that it's not the right person, you change the person. Okay, yes, and this is what I wanted to say. You see, what's interesting in English is that you can do that just simply with intonation. In particular, things like that. She wanted to see George this morning. And this is possible only with intonation in English. In French, as you noticed, each time I try to translate in French, I need to use a syntactic structure. In French, I can't say elle voulait voir Georges ce matin. You see, you can't do that. You need to use a cleft sentence, and you need to say c'est elle qui voulait voir Georges ce matin. You couldn't say just elle voulait voir Georges ce matin, or elle voulait voir Georges ce matin. You can't say that in French. You need to use the cleft sentence. You say c'est Georges qu'elle voulait voir ce matin. Or sometimes you use a dislocation. You say Georges il est venu ce matin. And then you could say, George came this morning. You could translate by, Georges il est venu ce matin. It's a dislocation. But anyway, at least a syntactic structure in French. So this is what's interesting. And in fact, in English, you can de-accentuate an element. Same here, for instance, wrote, you can de-accentuate brother. In Romance languages, French, Italian, Spanish, many other, you can't do that. You can never de-accentuate an element, and for instance in French you place accents on all words, in fact, whatever the information, even if it's already known, you place an accent. For instance, you could say j'avais pas de nouvelles de Georges, alors j'ai écrit à mon frère. Et en français c'est ambigu en fait. Vous ne pourriez pas dire alors j'ai écrit à mon frère. Ça marche pas. En français, on ne peut pas le faire. Okay. Yes, well, these are a few examples, just really to show you how phonetically or phonologically you pronounce this, but you know what, I'll just play it.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
So here the nucleus is on.
Don't do that.
That, yes, exactly, very good. The nucleus is on that. On this sentence.
Don't do that.
Where do you hear the nucleus? Excellent. On do. And the last one?
Don't do that.
Okay.
Don't do that.
Exactly. Excellent. On don't. Okay. So you see, you hear it. So that's really nice. You hear it. In fact, you have a fall on the nucleus, either on that, on do, and on don't. And In the last one, the nucleus is on the first element, on don't. And the... C'est possible de répéter le premier? Oui.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
In fact, if I had the board, I could maybe, I'm trying to draw it. I'm trying to draw. The first one would be, don't do that. Well, no. I'd rather do that. You'd have don't do that. Okay, roughly. And so you have the fall on that. And on the last one, you have don't do that. Okay? I don't know if it's clearer like this. And same here.
Why don't you try?
So here the nucleus is on try, exactly.
Why don't you try?
Okay. Here.
Why don't you try?
Exactly, on you, very well. Wait again.
Why don't you try?
Right, on you. Et en français, ce que je vous ai dit tout à l'heure, là, on aurait une dislocation, on aurait pourquoi toi, tu n'essayes pas. Nous, on ne peut pas dire pourquoi tu n'essayes pas. On dirait pourquoi toi, tu n'essayes pas.
Why don't you try? Why don't you try?
Very good. On don't. And the last one.
Why don't you try?
Exactly. Why?
Why don't you try?
Why don't you try? So again, here you have the fall on each element each time. So why don't you try? Fall on why. Okay. Okay, excellent. So next week, I'll tell you about tones. I don't have time this week, but it doesn't matter. So we saw tone units and we saw tonics. And next week, I'll talk about tones and I'll show you the different tones you have in English as opposed to maybe tones we have in French. And so maybe, I don't know if you see the slides here, but I'll show, you know, I'll play a few sounds and then I'll talk about the internal structure of a tone unit. So we'll do that next week. Okay. And would you post this? Why would you post this on Amitis? Yes, I can post the slide on Amitis. Okay, I will post what I did today. Okay, and so you have the references. Okay. Well, thank you, and see you next week, and see you in a few hours for those of you who have TD with me. And see you next week for the other ones. Bye-bye.